You made this really hard for me, Dave.
Yeah, I'm asking you to choose between your kids here, really.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, this is gonna tick some people off.
Welcome to Sports Media Behind the Scenes with Dave Kobert. Hey, that's me. Thanks for stopping by. I didn't want to start a podcast, but it followed me home. On this podcast, we go inside the press box, control room, live truck, and locker room for stories you won't hear anywhere else. So let's bring in my guest here in a moment. It's going to be Mr. Glenn Geffner. I got to work with Glenn a few times. Glenn was the longtime radio play-by-play announcer for the Marlins. Prior to that, he worked for the Red Sox and Padres. We'll get into some of that. I always enjoyed Glenn's ability to combine sharp play-by-play calls of the game with storytelling and a great sense of humor. And for me, Glenn was what I wanted to hear in a broadcaster. He took the game seriously, but never made it about himself. He was a great hang, which I think it was what that role is supposed to be. Even if it's a 10-1 game or the team is 25 games out in the dog days of summer, Glenn was always a great listen. And these days, Glenn's sharing his talent and expertise with college students and prospective broadcasters. We're going to get into all this and more. So it is a real honor for me to welcome in Glenn Geffner on Sports Media Behind the Scenes.
It's great to be with you, David. Thank you for the very kind introduction. Made my night.
Well, you were, a real natural. I always felt like I was hanging with a friend, and I think that's probably one of the goals of the job, isn't it?
That's exactly what it's all about, especially in a sport like baseball, where it's every single day, 162 games, where in good times and in bad times, good seasons and bad seasons, you're in everybody's cars, you're at the beach with them, you're wherever they are. Baseball on the radio especially has always been really special to me, and I feel like the best broadcasters are the ones who do create that bond. Even though you're sitting in this little room by yourself or with your partner and an engineer, you don't know who's out there listening. That person listening, which was me when I was a kid, and to this day, every now and then as well, it still is. You want to create that bond, and I appreciate the fact that you felt as though I was able to do that.
I want to get into a lot of that baseball stuff, but I want to start with present day, what you're doing now. I don't know if you consider yourself a retired broadcaster, but you are an educator now. So tell me about what you're doing these last couple of years, how it came to be, and kind of what your goals are as an educator, teacher, mentor.
I had a job for many years that a lot of high school and college students thought was pretty cool, and was always getting invited to speak at schools, high schools, colleges. I was being asked for advice and to listen to tapes and do things like that. And as the years went on, I came to realize I really enjoyed doing this sort of thing. So it was even before I left the Marlins. I was with the Marlins at the end of the 2022 season, but in 2021, I reached out to several local universities and said, "Hey, I've done this for a long time. I work with a lot of high schoolers and college students. I'd be really interested in doing this at the college level." And got some really positive feedback from a few schools. Wound up at Florida Atlantic University initially, teaching a sports broadcasting class, not just play by play. We do hosting, we do interviewing, we talk a lot about preparation, we talk about developing on air styles, things like that. And I've taught that course at FAU since 2021 and have added a couple of courses at the University of Florida as well in the last year, teaching first a sports media and society course at UF, which is kind of a sports media history class. It's a fascinating class.
You're getting into ethics, you're getting into social media pitfalls. Like, what are some of the things you're getting into?
We basically trace the history of sports media from the 1800s to today, and you see where sports and sports media intersects with American history and sociology, and how sports media played in the civil rights movement, in the gender rights movement, in the justice equality movement, and how the media itself grew and matured. And we go from the penny press in the 1800s to the golden age of radio, to the birth of television, to cable TV, and 24-hour radio and TV sports coverage, into today with streaming and social media. And athletes being their own media mouthpieces, really, in this day and age. So we go chronologically through 7 modules, each one covering a couple of decades, and tell a lot of great stories and introduce students to a lot of journalists and broadcasters who are pioneers. Uh, as you get later in the course, people I grew up with, the Howard Cosell's, the Jim McKays, people like that. I feel like everybody who studies sports journalism needs to hear Howard Cosell's voice and needs to understand the Howard Cosell Muhammad Ali dynamic. And they need to understand how Jackie Robinson's major league debut was covered in the white media versus how it was covered in the black media. And those are the kinds of things we talk about in the class. How Billie Jean King was able to use the media in advancing the gender equality movement. So it's a really fun class. I was asked to put it together and did so last summer, taught it for the first time in the fall, and I'll be teaching that again this semester in the spring at UF, in addition to now a play-by-play class at UF as well, which is different than the more broad sports broadcasting class I've taught at FAU. This will be a straight play-by-play class, and it's a lot of fun. I just really enjoy working with the students. Every now and then, seeing that light bulb go off for somebody, especially my sports broadcasting class, having somebody say, I kind of took this class thinking it would be fun and to step out of my comfort zone and try something different, but now I think I'd really like to do this. And when you're on a college campus, you have the chance to get reps and get involved in student radio, student television, things like that. So it's been really gratifying to see some of these people go on and do some things.
That's fantastic. You covered a lot of ground there. We could do a whole hour just talking about that class, regarding the social media and social impact of athletes. Jim
Mhm.
Brown and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and up to LeBron James.
That's exactly right. You're rattling off my names.
There's always a controversy. There's always a hot button issue for athletes to get involved in or not. And even if they abstain from a comment, and then they get judged on that. They almost can't win. It's a very complicated thing.
That's actually, you say that, Dave, that's a topic we talked about, and Michael Jordan took heat for not being vocal enough on certain issues,
Right.
but other athletes take heat for being too vocal, and that's something that we talk about in the class, and you raise a great point on that.
So in this process of teaching, what have you learned from your students and the way that they perceive and consume sports and sports media and social media? How are you able to kind of get into their headspace a little bit?
I'm fortunate in that I have 3 children of my own between the ages of 17 and 25, so that connection with college students is relatively easy for me. I feel as though if I didn't have that advantage going in, they've grown up in a different world than you and I grew up in, and they follow sports differently, they watch and listen to sports differently, they look at the world differently than we did, and so I feel pretty fortunate that my own experiences at home really prepared me for this. Having children the specific ages of my 3 right now, has really helped me a lot, but it's a different time. And part of that is good, part of that's bad. I look at the resources students today have, the facilities they have on campus, the opportunities they have to do things that you and I couldn't have dreamed of doing when we were in college far too many years ago.
Are you saying we're old, Glenn?
Well, we're getting there. I just had a birthday a couple of days ago and I'm feeling it.
Yeah, we are. It's okay.
The opportunities that high school students have today, the facilities you see in so many high schools in South Florida are remarkable. Light years better than what I had many years ago when I was in college at Northwestern, one of the great journalism schools in the country. It's remarkable. You go up to Gainesville now and you see the facilities, the University of Florida,
Yeah, it's my alma mater.
and the opportunity these students have to call SEC football and basketball and do things like that. It's truly remarkable. So there are a lot of great things about trying to get into the business today. And I always tell people you can make the argument there's never been a better time to try to get into the business than right now. But there's also never been a tougher time because of financial challenges and more people trying to do it. There's a lot of competition. So it's an interesting area, that's for sure.
Everything is flooded, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. One of the things I'm interested in this podcast is what is your origin story, your Peter Parker Spider-Man moment? For me, as a kid, it was NFL films. It was This Week in Baseball. I was 8 or 10, and this was the stuff that was getting into my imagination. What was it for you way before college that kind of inspired you?
My first actual baseball memory was watching the 1975 World Series, the Red Sox and the Reds, the Carlton Fisk home run. I don't remember all the details of that, but I remember watching the 1975 World Series. But the couple of turning point moments for me, I remember a day in April of whatever year in the '70s. My dad was heading out to go to work, and I was getting ready for school, and he plopped a newspaper down in front of me, opened up the sports page, and said, "The baseball season started yesterday." And I saw my first box score, and that was a transformative moment for me, being able to look every day at the box scores and follow. Growing up in South Florida, we didn't have Major League Baseball down here.
Right.
Box scores just fascinated me, and I played baseball. It's the one and only sport I ever played, and then a real turning point moment in my life was in 1978 because we didn't have Major League Baseball down here. We had spring training, and we used to always go see the Orioles at Old Miami Stadium and the Yankees up in Fort Lauderdale. We were actually at an Orioles-Yankees game at Miami Stadium really early during batting practice where the game started, down in the front row right by the Yankees dugout. And Greg Nettles, the Yankees third baseman, was taking batting practice. At the end of his round, he walked over and handed me a bat that I still have about 2 feet to my right at this moment. And I remember walking out of Miami Stadium that night holding that bat, and I've often thought about how that gesture by Greg Nettles probably turned me on to baseball in a way that never could have happened otherwise. And I went on actually to work with his daughter with the Padres. She was in the Padres front office when I was there, and he was scouting for the Yankees at the time and often came out to games in San Diego. I was able to tell him that story on one occasion. Uh, but I think about that, how Greg Nettles, great, unbelievable defensive third baseman, postseason hero, really was the guy who somehow just made baseball come alive for me and really made it something I wanted to do. So, I collected baseball cards like a fiend. And I started broadcasting games in my bedroom when I was a kid, 7, 8 years old. If the Red Sox and Yankees were playing on the game of the week, you mentioned This Week in Baseball at 12:30, the game of the week with Joe Garagiola and Tony Kubek at 1 o'clock every Saturday. That's how we consume baseball. But if the Red Sox were playing the Yankees, I'd get my Red Sox cards out and my Yankees cards out and turn them over. So I had the statistics all in the order of the batting order. And I'd literally turn the volume down on the TV and broadcast the game in my bedroom. And that's how I started a long time ago.
You were getting reps, you thought you were having fun, but you were really preparing for your career. You just didn't know it at the time, right?
And so by the time I got to college and I saw they're having auditions at the student radio station, I said, "Hey, I've done a million of these games. I've broadcast World Series games in my bedroom." So I felt like I was ready for anything at that point.
So you're at Northwestern in Chicago, which is obviously a prestigious school and one of the best communications broadcasting schools in the country for a long time. Did you know, like, you put all your chips in, so to speak, this is gonna be my career? Did you kind of hedge your bets and, how did it kind of, come to be that you would really pursue this as a career?
When I left for college in the fall of 1986, broadcasting didn't really seem attainable, in that you didn't have broadcasting opportunities in high schools in those days. So I'd worked for the student newspaper at Palmetto High School in Miami and thought I was going to be a writer. And so I studied journalism at Northwestern, the Medill School. Uh, and my dream at that time was to cover Major League Baseball for Sports Illustrated, which was at one time the gold standard in print journalism.
Yeah, Sporting News and SI, yeah.
I had a subscription to SI from the time I was probably 10 years old, up until just a few years ago when it finally reached the point it just doesn't make sense anymore. It's not a shell of what it once was. But I thought when I went to college, that's what I wanted to do. I'd love to cover Major League Baseball for Sports Illustrated and follow in that great lineage of writers. Uh, Fall quarter freshman year, I saw they were having auditions at the student radio station for the sports department. And I said, you know what, I'm going to give this a try. And I got involved as a freshman at the very beginning, and used to go in at 9:50 on Monday nights to do a weekly sports cast. And little by little, got to engineer some games and spot for some games. And I think by the spring was doing color on some baseball, and then by my sophomore year, was able to start doing some play-by-play, football, basketball, baseball. We traveled with the teams at Northwestern in those years. So that's where I got the bug, and I knew at that point that's really what I wanted to do.
I also had a chance to do some radio in college as a rock and roll FM DJ. Not a real creative entity, but a great experience in a lot of ways, and that's a whole other chapter of my life. But the University of Florida had a great communication school, still does, and
One of the best.
so you led me into actually where I was gonna go also. So, for athletes, and I am not one of those, for people who are good athletes, they say, play different sports year round. Even if you excel at one, all the different sports are gonna help you eventually. So, how did calling football and, maybe volleyball or any other things that you called, how did that help make you a better baseball broadcaster, or if it did?
Well, I think every rep you get, no matter what you're doing, makes you better. You get more comfortable, especially in college. It's about making mistakes and learning from those mistakes when the whole world's not listening to you. And certainly in a time before social media, where heaven forbid today you ever misspeak on the air, you're going to hear about it from 1,000 people. But I love being around live sporting events. I never wanted to be an anchor or a host. I wanted to be right in the middle of the action. And I wanted to be having that conversation, talking about it, like growing up in Miami, listening to Phil Rizzuto and Bill White call the Yankees games on WIOD back in the day. I wanted to do what those guys did. I wanted to do what Vince Scully did. Or, you saw Joe and Tony on the game of the week. And so whatever experience I got, I thought was really valuable. But baseball was always the one and only goal for me. I never thought about being a guy who could do football in the fall and basketball in the winter and baseball in the spring. Baseball is what I played. It's what I knew. It's what I read everything I could about. I devoured it. History, trivia, you name it. And you know, in some ways, this goes against the advice I give my students today, where I say you want to be as versatile as possible. The more you do, TV, radio, different sports, being versatile makes you valuable. I really locked in on baseball, and it worked out for me though because right out of school I was able to get into baseball. And once you start working year round in baseball, as the years went on, because baseball is such a grind, 162 games, you get to the point where you have a wife, you have children, you have other priorities. I never even thought about wanting to do something in the off season. I just devoted myself to baseball year round.
I'm sure you do consider yourself, lucky to be able to achieve what you were dreamed about and worked hard to do. Not everyone gets to do that. So after college, you wind up working for the Rochester Red Wings, AAA. What was the most like minor league thing about working in Rochester, and what was that overall experience like?
I graduated from Northwestern a quarter early. Northwestern's on the quarter system, not the semester system. So I I took classes one summer. I did an internship for credit one summer so I could finish up in the winter quarter because my goal was to get a job in baseball and I wanted to be able to start before opening day and not have to wait until June to start. And what I got was an unpaid internship in AAA at Rochester, which to me was nothing more than a line on the back of Cal Ripken's baseball card. I didn't know anything about Rochester, New York, or the great history of the Rochester Red Wings at that time. But I went in there as an unpaid intern and I was able as an intern to do all the team's PR and do a little bit of broadcasting. And all that eventually led to me being the full time PR director and the full time broadcaster. But how did I pay the bills as an unpaid intern? I made Mascot appearances, $25 a pop. And this I was going to show you is me as R.W. Homer, the Rochester Red Wings mascot. This was in the summer of 1990. So I had Northwestern friends who were at medical school or in law school or whatever they were doing. And I was making 25 bucks a pop. The only thing missing from this picture are the giant red clown shoes that R.W. Homer generally wore over the sneakers I'm wearing in that picture. But you see the baseball pants, uh, and that's the mascot of the Red Wings, R.W. Homer back then. But the funny part about being R.W. Homer, sometimes wearing the costume during games, was that playing in the old ballpark in Rochester that had these huge ramps at the very top that went all the way down to the bottom. A lot of kids realized if you knocked RW off his feet in those red clown shoes, he was round and he was gonna roll. And he would roll until he got to the chain link fence at the very bottom. And I spent a lot of that summer black and blue,
Oh my goodness.
but I wouldn't trade a second of the experience. And, we had a very small front office and we all pulled tarp and we all sold advertising. I made mascot appearances, marched in the 4th of July parade uh, on a steaming hot day, Charlotte Beach, New York, marched like a 2 mile parade route, which was all well and good. But then at the end of the 2 miles, I had to go 2 miles back to my car and I'm wearing the suit and you can't take the suit off. So I kept the suit on and marched, back to my car. By this time, people are picnicking and playing ball in their backyards and doing whatever they do on the 4th of July in a small town America. And you just see R.W. Homer walking through the streets of Charlotte Beach, New York. But there were a lot of great R.W. stories from that summer. And he was asked to sign a lot of autographs, some on unusual body parts, things like that we won't get into. But that was when I think back to those days. And I actually have this picture on my phone. I'll show it to students I talk to. And the thing is, when you're trying to get your foot in the door, when you're trying to get started, no job is too big or too small. And when I look back now on 3 plus decades in baseball, one of the very first things I think about is not being part of 3 World Series and winning 2 World Series. It's those years in Rochester where I got to wear the mascot outfit and we were all such a family. And I met my wife working for the Red Wings. And to this day, a lot of the people I work with in Rochester are my closest friends in the world. So people talk about paying your dues early in your career. I never wanted to look at paying your dues as a negative. I wanted to enjoy paying my dues, and I did. Had a great time in Rochester, so good, in fact, I had a couple of chances to leave Rochester and go to the major leagues, but I chose to stay in Rochester because I was so happy there at the time.
So you go from Rochester to the San Diego Padres. So, what was that experience like? What are some of your memories there? And actually, I remember another conversation years ago. I remember you talking about sitting down with Tony Gwynn and getting a chance to know him. So, if you could give me a little overview of your time out there and maybe a good Tony Gwynn story that you have.
Well, I spent 5 years in San Diego, or 6 years in San Diego. The last 5 years of Tony Gwynn's career were my first 5 years. So I overlapped with Tony for 5 years at the very end of his career, and to this day, I tell people I learned more baseball from Tony Gwynn than anybody I've ever been around. Uh, Not every day I went on the air over the years, but many days I went on the air over the years, even to the end, things would roll off my tongue that Tony Gwynn told me in 1997 or 1998. And I've told his son that on several occasions, that his dad's voice comes out of my mouth. His dad's words come out of my mouth. He made such an impact on me watching him do what he did at the level he did it, and even late in his career through a lot of injuries, but just go out there and keep it in 330 every year, to win a batting title, his 8th and final batting title my first year there, to watch him hit a big home run in game 1 of the World Series in 1998, our 2nd year together. He just was a very unique and special person, and the best conversations you'd have with Tony Gwynn or that anybody in the media even would have. And remember, in the beginning, I was the Padres PR director, and then I transitioned into broadcasting. But I was Tony's PR guy for the first several years. So to watch him handle the media and do what he did on a daily basis, the best conversations with Tony would always start with, "I ain't got nothing to say today, but," and then 90 minutes later, he'd be done talking. He filled a lot of notebooks in those days, and he was unbelievable. But just to watch the way he went about the art of hitting and how hard he worked at it, and it's easy to think with a guy like Tony Gwynn, just like with an Ichiro who we saw in Miami or some of the other people I've been around over the years, oh, it just comes easy to them. It doesn't come easy. They're so good at what they do and so consistent because they work so hard at it and they're so consistent in their work. So to be able to bookend my career with Tony Gwynn at the beginning and then Ichiro at the end was really special as well. In fact, I'll tell you a Tony Gwynn Ichiro story. Uh, Ichiro's first year in the big leagues was 2001, which was Tony's final year in the big leagues. And the Padres and Mariners shared a spring training complex in Peoria, Arizona. So we saw a lot of the Mariners. And Ichiro, if you go back and look this up, had a terrible spring, his first spring training with the Mariners. Couldn't buy a hit. He was late on fastballs, fouling balls into the third base dugout. And people were really beginning to question whether or not this guy was going to be a successful big league hitter. So at the end of the spring, I went up to Tony in the Padres clubhouse one day. I said, "Tell me about this guy. He's got all this hype, but we haven't seen him do anything." He said, "I'm telling you, this guy is playing possum." Those are his exact words. "This guy is gonna turn it on opening day, and this guy is gonna rake." He saw whatever he saw in Ichiro and predicted that, but they were so similar in so many ways, and then to have the chance years later to work with Ichiro was really special. But, Tony was amazing in that, and then remember, when he walked away from the major leagues, he went right into coaching at his alma mater, San Diego State. 1 year as an assistant to his college coach, Jim Dietz. Then Dietz retired and Tony took over the program. And, right up until his final days, Tony was the head coach of the Aztecs. He could have had an unbelievable broadcasting career. And he did a little bit of broadcasting, had a lot of offers to do more, but he wanted to teach the game. He didn't want to teach the game in the big leagues. He wanted to get down in the trenches and work with college players. And right until the very end, that's what he was doing. And that brought him more joy than anything.
You're in San Diego, you go on to Boston and then Miami. We'll get into that. What was like kind of your first pinch me moment? Oh my God, I'm calling a major league game. I'm getting to see this type, whether it was a no hitter or just something unbelievable.
I don't know about a first pinch me moment. Remember, I started in PR in San Diego, transitioned into radio. Then when I went to the Red Sox, I was the vice president of communications initially, and then transitioned into radio. So I was the head of PR for the Red Sox when we won the World Series in 2004, the curse of the Bambino, coming back from 3-0 down against the Yankees. So that's the one season that stands out above all others. But then I was on the mic when the Red Sox won the World Series again in 2007, working with Hall of Famer Joe Castiglione. So I would say calling a World Series was pretty cool. Calling game 1 of the World Series in Fenway Park was pretty cool. Having had the chance to ride in 2, Red Sox championship parades was pretty cool on the duck boats throughout Boston. Uh, there were so many along the way, so many great moments, and but I really, to me, when I think back, I think more about the people and the conversations around the batting cage or the conversations on the charter or in the back of a taxi cab on the way to the ballpark with somebody, whatever it may be, more than specific moments or games. I was lucky my second year in San Diego, we went to the World Series in '98, lost to the Yankees, that unbelievable Yankees team that won 125 games between the regular season and the postseason. So that was remarkable, putting 65,000 in Qualcomm Stadium for World Series games, and that led to the passage of Prop C, which led to the new ballpark in San Diego. It was a huge year there. So I was around a lot of cool stuff, a lot of very cool people over the years. I don't know if there's one specific moment, but certainly calling a World Series in hindsight was the opportunity that I'll remember. Not everybody has one of those, no matter how long you broadcast in the major leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously Boston, their first one in what was it,
86
86
years
years?
in
Yeah.
'04, yeah, and he did it again in '07.
You come to Miami, and you're working with Dave Van Horne, who had a 30+ year legendary career in Montreal, and then he spent many years here. So, what did you get out of working with Dave in particular? And what was that relationship like for you?
So here's a great piece of trivia from my career. I worked with the Hall of Fame broadcaster at each of my 3 stops. Jerry Coleman with the San Diego Padres, Joe Castiglione, just won the Frick Award in 2024 with the Red Sox, and then Dave with the Marlins. And what the 3 of them have a lot in common, but when I talk about Dave Van Horn specifically, the first thing you think of is the pipes. Nobody had pipes like Dave Van Horn. But more than that, the goodness of the man and the way he treated people and how every city we would go to on the road, whether it was an usher or an elevator operator or a tech he had worked with going back to the 1970s when he was with the Expos, these people, team owners, club presidents, everybody would want to come by the booth and spend some time with Dave, that he had made that much of an impression and impact and had made so many friends around the game. In all seriousness, we're talking about ushers and elevator operators and the people that work in the dining room. Everywhere you go around the league, to have put in as many years and to have left the game with as much respect and admiration as Dave did is really something that we should all strive to do. It's not just about what he was able to do on the air, which was great and certainly Hall of Fame worthy, but the relationships that he made, the things that he saw and was a part of. He was remarkable, right down to the last game he called.
When we did a piece with you a few years ago, with you and Dave at the time, we had a high school announcer reporter with us for our show, and we put her on the air. You guys put her on the air, and no names here, but she froze. It's a common thing. The first time I got on the radio, I started hyperventilating. It's not an easy gig. It's a little harder than it looks. But I remember in that conversation when you were mentoring this young lady for her moment, you showed and we talked about the prep it took for a single game. Can you put into words how much work, how much preparation, conversations, hours would go into preparing for any one broadcast?
This is one of the things I stress with my students. A lot of people think if you're calling a game that starts at 7:10, you show up at the ballpark at 6:30, and that's not the way it works. For me, preparation is 90% of the job. There's a great Roger Clemens line from going back. He said for him, the night he pitched was the easy day of his week. The 4 days leading up to each start was when all the work was done. And for me, that's what the preparation was. That's when all the work was done. And I was always somebody who took preparation very seriously. I was over prepared, I think, at all times, wanted to be ready for anything that might possibly happen. You wanted to have stories. You wanted to have interesting statistics that help tell stories. You wanted to be able to say, I was down around the batting cage and so told me this, and this pitcher's working on that, and the manager told me this. You want to, especially in this day and age where the typical fan has access to so much information through social media. And if you're a diehard Yankees fan, you feel like you know everything there is to know about the New York Yankees. I've got to come on the air as the voice of a team and tell you things that you don't know. I've got to use my access. And that's what the preparation was all about. So a lot of reading that never ends year round, a lot of filing notes away for the right time. I do my own statistical work every single day on both teams, on starting pitchers, relief pitchers, every hitter. I never used game notes and media guides. And the funny thing is, as a PR person, I produced game notes and media guides. But as a broadcaster, I never used them for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was afraid there might be a mistake in there. And once I speak that mistake, it's my mistake. And number two is my partner was most likely using those notes and media guides. And the guys in the TV booth were most likely using those notes and media guides. I wanted to bring things to the broadcast every night that you were only going to get if you were listening to me. And so I did all my own statistics and numbers every day. I liked having my own conversations with people. The manager talks to the media, 20, 30 people before the game every night, but then you spend a couple of minutes with him to ask a couple of additional questions. And when you develop really good relationships, they tell you things you're not always going to say on camera or when all the recorders are rolling because they respect you enough to know that you're not going to use the information in a way that could make them look bad. A manager might not tell the media at 4 o'clock that the lefty reliever is not available tonight because he doesn't want the other team to know that. But he's going to tell me that, hey, we've used this guy 2 nights out of three and his shoulder's barking a little bit. So I'm not going to go on the air and say, what the heck is the manager thinking by not bringing the lefty in this spot? I can smooth it over a little bit, massage it a little bit. So that's part of the preparation as well. Reading constantly, talking to people constantly. When I was in my car driving to and from the ballpark, I was almost always on the phone. And that might be talking with a scout or talking with an executive from another team or talking with another broadcaster who maybe just saw the team that we're about to play to get some information, whatever it took. So the preparation is never ending. And for me, it was always really one of the fun parts of the job.
Is it almost that feeling of there's so much information, there's not enough time in the day to even have it all at my fingertips, and I can only just keep swimming and hope I have enough?
For sure, and so that's how my preparation evolved over the years. At a certain point, I realized, hey, these are things I want to have every single night. I'm going to do these every night. There are other things I can look up in the middle of the game. If a pitcher's got 9 strikeouts, I want to know how many times he struck out 10 or more in a game. I can look that up during the game. Don't always have to have that going into the game, for example. And I tell my students, you don't want to turn a broadcast into math class. It's not all about just spitting out numbers for the sake of spitting out numbers and statistics. You want to use meaningful statistics that help tell a story. And I enjoyed that game of trying to come up with statistics like that that helped you tell a story or finding out something about a player that nobody else knew and connecting the dots between this player on this team and that player on that team and things like that. Certainly baseball history type things that might apply on broadcast on a given night. So, uh, yeah, you can certainly over prepare. And I'm sure I over prepared every day of my career in the broadcast booth, but I also felt like I never wanted to be under prepared. And, I would feel like I know for a fact I could walk into a broadcast booth and call a major league game blind today if you asked me to. Uh, but I'd feel naked going in there if I hadn't done my homework. So that's part of the job. And for me, it was a really fun part of the job.
Yeah, for me as a baseball fan, I watch and listen to countless games in any season. This is my personal opinion. I'd rather hear stories. I'd rather than hear about the spin rate and the exit velo. And there's times when that stuff's really relevant, but sometimes I feel like the listener viewer can just get drowned in that stuff.
No doubt. It's math class, and we all tune out math class. And we also now, Dave, when you bring that up with analytics, with some of the things, spin rate and exit velo, you know, some people live by that and swear by that. And if you're a general manager and you're assembling a club, you want to have all that information. But for the typical fan, if I tell you somebody hit 330 with 35 homers, 120 RBIs last year, you know he had a good year. If I tell you he had 4.4 WAR last year, what does that mean? What's the context of that? How do you figure out WAR? What's a good exit velocity? What's a good spin rate? You need context for that, and to get into as much context as you would have to provide on a lot of those types of numbers, it's a hard thing to do, especially on radio. Sometimes on TV, you see they put a graphic up where it'll explain the statistic they're talking about, but on radio, it's a hard thing to do. So analytics is a whole nother can of worms. It's part of how the game changed, how broadcasting changed over the course of my 31 years in baseball. And to me, it's not one of the better parts because you do hear a lot more numbers, I feel, these days than stories, as you point out. The stories are things that people remember. The stories are things that somebody will hear on a broadcast and then tell a buddy at work the next day or tell a friend at school the next day. And that's the stuff that I really enjoyed delivering stories that people hadn't heard about players they thought they knew or teams they thought they knew.
Totally agree. That was one of the reasons, I enjoyed listening to you and as well as some of the other people who are out there doing a great job now. Is there one you want to drop a name as someone that you kind of say, I don't care what the score is, I don't care what the game is, I want to listen, spend some time with this announcer.
My answer to that for years, he's now retired, was Vern Lundquist. We do a thing in my class, we talk about one broadcaster for one game. If you can listen to one broadcaster call one game, I loved listening to Vern Lundquist, college football especially, SEC football especially. Whatever he did though over there, he did a lot of basketball, NBA in college, he did Olympic figure skating. Uh, Vern was just when you talk about going back to the beginning of our conversation, feeling as though you had a bond with somebody who you were watching or listening to. Vern seems like your uncle, your grandfather, and you're just sitting enjoying a ball game with him in a leisurely manner. The folksiness of his delivery was not ever anything that I tried to emulate, but it's something I really enjoyed listening to. Now, that said, at the same time, I like a lot of different styles of broadcasters. Eric Collins, who's the voice of the Charlotte Hornets, does NBA games on Amazon Prime now. Has done a lot of college football and basketball on Fox and FS1. Is a very good friend of mine. And Eric is an over the top enthusiasm guy. And I love listening to that. I love listening to Gus Johnson with his over the top enthusiasm at times. Jim Nance is so classy. I love that. So there are a lot of different styles, and there are things to me that you can appreciate out of so many of them. But to go back to your initial question, if there's one broadcaster, I felt that way about Vern Lundquist. I was a big Brent Musburger fan also. I know Brent had his detractors, but for me, the thing about Brent was whatever game he was calling, you had the sense there was nowhere else on earth he would rather be tonight than in Lubbock, Texas,
Yeah.
calling this Texas A&M game or whatever it may be. Uh, and I like when you get that feeling from the broadcast. You sometimes hear broadcasters criticized for not sounding like they care enough or they're just dialing it in, which I think is unfair with all the work that goes into doing what broadcasters do. But Brent always gave me that impression. There was nowhere else on earth he wanted to be than where he was that night, and I really appreciated and respected that about him.
Yeah, for me, it's Kevin Harlan. I would listen to him
Yep.
call badminton, tiddlywinks,
Yep.
you name it. In
Yep.
fact, sometimes when there's been a streaker or someone who shouldn't be on the field, he turns that into a broadcast. I think
Yeah,
he's the
Ian
best.
Eagle is another guy among contemporary broadcasters right now, who in that same vein has a really good sense of humor. Sean McDonough for me, and I should have mentioned Sean's name earlier. Uh, there may be somebody who calls baseball better than Sean McDonough, or basketball, or hockey, or football, but for me, nobody does all four as well as Sean McDonough. And Sean's ability to weave in a very subtle sense of humor is great. He's always prepared for anything. If I had to pick a current number one guy, I would go with Sean McDonough.
Have you called your last game? You're still a young man.
I do some stuff at the University of Miami these days. I do a handful of games a year on ACC Network Extra for them just to get out to the ballpark. They called me several years ago and said, "Hey, you want to do a game?" And it's turned into a handful of games a year, and I enjoy doing that. I'm at a point in my life and with my family where I'm really not looking to move unless the right thing came along. So I haven't spent the last couple of years, knocking on Major League Baseball teams' doors. Uh, if I have, I have. If I haven't, I haven't. But it's hard to get in to begin with, and it's even harder to get back in once you've been out for a little while. And names change, decision makers change, and it's broadcast is a young man's business these days. It seems like also, you see broadcast booths getting a lot younger. We can talk about that anytime you want to.
Younger slash cheaper. When we all know where
You said it, not me.
that. So let's just want to hit a couple kind of some fun topics with you. I appreciate all your time. If you could, get in the time machine and go back and be able to call a historical baseball game moment, what would that be for you?
Wow. The era I'd like to be a part of is the 1950s and to be in New York when you had the 3 teams, the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Giants all in New York, and where they say you could hear fans at the Polo Grounds if you were sitting in Yankee Stadium. They were close enough together across the river. So that would be it. And so maybe if we're gonna go that route, maybe 1951, down the stretch, the Dodgers and the Giants, the great race, and then the playoff series, to get to the World Series after they ended the regular season tied before they had playoffs in those days, but they had the best of 3 playoff to get to the World Series. Maybe that would be it. Maybe I coulda had the call on, Bobby Thompson's home run.
1951, maybe you get to call
Yep,
the whole season?
that
Yeah,
would be fun.
yeah,
That would be fun.
well, quantum leap, we'll put you in that. That'd be pretty awesome. I was thinking about the, fictional portrayal of baseball announcers in TV and film, and there's been a bunch of them. Rank these for me. You've heard of, start, bench, cut. It's the same idea here. Superstar, all-star, role player. Bob Uecker as Harry Doyle in Major League. Got Hank Azaria as Jim Brockmire. And then, a guy, I don't know if you know this name, but you would know the voice and the face, a gentleman named Garland Bunting. Do you know who that was?
No, I don't think so.
He he was, someone that they found to play the announcer in Bull Durham.
Oh, okay.
As he's a Frank sports fans, he used a word that is a no-no with umpires. That's
Okay, I can hear the voice. You did a nice
Thank you.
impersonation there. I gotta go Harry Doyle as a superstar. I'm gonna go Garland Bunting as an all-star because when I think about that, when I think about great baseball voices, Ernie Harwell was a guy who I loved back in the day, and Ernie Harwell had that little bit of the southern drawl, like you talk about with Harlan Bunting, that to me says baseball when you hear it. There are a handful of broadcasters doing major league games today who you still hear that from. So I'll go all-star with him, and I'm gonna go role player for Brockmire. I've never watched the entire series. I've seen bits and pieces of Brockmire.
Yeah, that's enough. Yeah, that's enough to judge it.
You know, he's more of a caricature of a broadcaster, in my
A
opinion.
little more
But
profane than the FCC would
yeah,
probably.
well, you know, when you hit the cough button, everybody can be a little profane these days. The key is hitting the cough button.
Yeah, gotta be careful these days. Do you have a Bob Uecker story? Did you cross paths with him?
You know, the thing about Uke, we'd see them once or twice a year. He wasn't traveling a lot in the later years. So I don't have a personal the night I went out on the town with Bob Uecker kind of story. But the thing that I always saw about Bob Uecker that really stood out to me was the relationship that Bob had with Brewers players. And my goal was never to be buddy buddy with the players that I work with. Um, you hear stories. Vin Scully, for example, when the Dodgers would win the World Series, Vin wouldn't go to the celebrations. He wouldn't socialize with the players in any way as the years went on. And I understand that. And it's not that I felt like that, but my goal, especially as I got older, and they could have been my sons in many cases, my goal was never to be buddy buddy with the player. But Uke was so respected and so beloved, and those players would do anything for Uke. It was a very unique relationship. And as the years went on, and as the chasm between the clubhouse and the rest of the world began to grow, even if you were a team broadcaster, even if you were in the traveling party and on the charter and on the buses and stuff, it became different. In early in my career, I was kind of one of them. I was part of the family in San Diego and into the Boston years, maybe for a little bit at the beginning in Miami. But as the years went on and you talk to broadcasters around the game, this is a universal thing that's changed a lot, and players tend to have less time for anybody, even if you're a team employee, team broadcaster, trying to make them look good a lot of the time. But Uke was a guy who transcended that somehow, and just the champagne celebrations in the clubhouse in Milwaukee would not start until Uke got down to the clubhouse. That's how much they liked and respected him. He was part of the team, not even part of the family. He was part of the team, and so I always really admired that about him, and it made me really happy to see that. And obviously, you saw the way everybody in Milwaukee was impacted when he passed away, and how hard the players took it, how hard everybody in that organization took it. So that's the big thing. The man had an unbelievable sense of humor, obviously, and he loved the game, and he gave his life to the game. There's a lot to be said for that.
Another superstar, all-star role player. You got to call games in, I believe, every active MLB stadium.
I never got to the new park in Texas.
Okay,
That's the only one.
alright, and plus some that don't exist anymore.
Many, yeah. I'm at about 60 something ballparks where I called a major league game.
Wow, that's amazing. So, now this is gonna be hard 'cause one you worked, closely at one of these parks, but how would you, rank Fenway Park, Wrigley Field, Dodger Stadium, the 3 oldest active parks?
Wow, this is gonna tick some people off in a city that I love very much. I'm gonna go Fenway Park Superstar. I'm gonna go Dodger Stadium All-Star, and I can't even say it out loud, but Wrigley Role Player, if that's the standard here. I love Wrigley Field. I love the organ at Wrigley Field. I love the ivy. I love the scoreboard. I love the neighborhood. I love everything about it. But Fenway, obviously, having lived there, I'll tell you a Fenway Park story. Early on in my first year at with the Red Sox, I was talking to Johnny Pesky in the clubhouse one day. Johnny Pesky been with the Red Sox 60 plus years as a player, a coach, a scout, and he was in uniform every day when the team was at home. Um, and Johnny Pesci walked up to me one day and said, "Hey kid, how you enjoying your time with the Red Sox?" I said, "Johnny, I love it. I got to be honest with you though, I literally still get chills every time I walk into Fenway Park." He said, "Kid," he called everybody kid. He said, "Kid, I've been coming to this park for 66 years and I still get chills when I walk in here." And that's what Fenway was to me. And to see it, the Red Sox started their historic sellout streak on May 15th of my first season there. So from May 15th of my first year through the end of my fifth and final season with the Red Sox, every single game was sold out. And a Wednesday night April game against the Royals felt like a World Series game for all the years I was in Boston. There's nowhere like it. So give me Fenway. I love Dodger Stadium. I had never stepped foot in Dodger Stadium until I got to the big leagues, and it was one of those things where the first time I walked in there, I felt like I'd seen a million games there because it looks and feels exactly like you thought it would on TV, and so much history there, and so many impactful players, and so many great games and great moments. And then when you get up to the radio booth and you watch the sunset over the hills, and there's nothing like it. So I love Dodger Stadium, and I love Wrigley also. So you made this really hard for me, Dave.
Yeah, I'm asking you to choose between your kids here, really.
Yeah, exactly. But give me Fenway, Dodger Stadium, and Wrigley.
Glenn, it has been a real pleasure. Thank you for being on this podcast.
Happy to do it. One day I'll be your first repeat guest if you want, Dave.
I would be honored. I really appreciate it. I know I think that we could talk, another 10 or 20 hours and not get bored. I really enjoy your insights, your experience, and your perspective on all things broadcasting and baseball. And hope to speak with you again.
Thank you.
Don't forget to follow, subscribe, like, and share this podcast. Every little step counts. If you've got comments, questions, or just want to send me a line to complain or ask me a question, please reach me at sportsmediapodcast@gmail.com. I'm Dave Kobert. Thanks for stopping by. See you next time.